Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and to our latest video. We're continuing our tour through South Wales and have been meaning to get the opportunity to visit here for some time, whilst we've been exploring, and we finally found the perfect day to come and enjoy a visit around a castle within a castle in the beautiful town of Kidwelly. Walk the ruins with us where we discover a turbulent history, a princess fighting for her people, and the setting for the opening scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So join us for a wander here at Kidwelly Castle. Upon looking up at the massive gatehouse, it's here that the scene in Monty Python was shot, and it began before jetting off to Castle Doon in Scotland, where it was actually filmed. It seemed very fitting that they chose Kidwelly as an intimidating point of interest for their opening shot, as the gatehouse looks mighty and fortified. As an attacker, you really would have to do some thinking into being able to infiltrate through those thick walls and all of the defensive points surrounding the castle. First constructed in 1114, Kidwelly Castle's layout is of a concentric Norman plan. It was built on a ridge overlooking the river, and though originally built in timber, it later came into royal possession and was strengthened against a possible French invasion to come. The first castle was built by the Bishop of Salisbury, Roger de Caen, a very rich, important and influential man, who had already constructed a number of stone castles in England, but Kidwelly was a frontier effort. It was built in wood and constructed in a half ringwork shape, which you'll be able to see later from the air. It was shaped like this to use the river and its steep bank to protect its eastern defences. Roger also had founded a priory on the other side of the river. Later on, shortly after the death of King Henry I, the Welsh saw an opportunity to regain their lands back from the chaos that was unfolding in front of them. And one iconic and dramatic event that really shook things up was the courageous battle of Gwenllian, the fiery wife of the Deheubarth prince Gruffydd ap Rhys, against the Normans near Kidwelly Castle. It was in 1136 that the time arose for the Welsh to take back their lands that was lost to the Marcher Lords, and the revolt against the Normans had begun in the south of Wales. Whilst her husband was in other neighbouring towns, seeking some alliance from their armies, Gwenllian came under attack by the Normans, which was led by Maurice de Londres, so she was forced into raising an army ready to attack. The battle was fought on the lands near the castle. Fighting alongside her were her two sons, and pictures were painted of this day, saying that she marched in the front, looking like the Queen of the Amazons with her strikingly long red hair, and she was poised ready for battle, leading her men against the Normans in a bloody battle. Reinforcements of the Norman army were marching up to join them, so the princess had half of her men try and delay them, but their efforts were soon destroyed and overrun, leaving her trapped in the middle of two Norman armies. The battle was quite short in comparison, just purely by not having enough manpower to back up the Norman soldiers. Herself and her 20-year-old son Morgan were caught, captured and chained up, and then marched throughout the town like common prisoners. The sad ending of them both had the two of them executed brutally. Gwenllian had pleaded for her son's life, but that plea was never listened to by Londres, and he had commanded that the son was to be killed and her head was to be beheaded over her son's body. Many people still believe that her ghost haunts the castle and the surroundings, wishing to be reunited with her family. The princess was a warrior, a mother, and a brave leader who will always be remembered. She is celebrated as a rightful local hero, and a memorial to her stands just outside the castle's gatehouse. As we step inside the dark rooms of the South Gatehouse, we walk around the what was creepy and eerie prison cells. All in all, this room was fitting for what its purpose actually was. It was cold, drab and damp, and also quite small, so you would feel claustrophobic back in its day. Unfortunately, a Norman invention, and not a nice one at that, was what's named an oubliette, the French meaning for a secret dungeon, come basement room, or a bottle dungeon, that was only accessible from the hole at the top of the high ceiling. The purpose of this was that the victims would be dropped into it, with the idea that they would starve and dehydrate to death, and have no way of getting back out. A truly horrible and barbaric way to go. We then get our first glimpse of the outer ward, and you'll see the large stone towers that dominate the viewpoint before we descend upstairs to the gatehouse, to the many different rooms of this building. The Great Gatehouse, as it's known, took at least a century to build, and it was unfinished at the time of the Welsh siege in 1403. As mentioned earlier, it was not until 1422 that the building finally received its lead roof, and the gate passage has a tower on either side, with basements that would have provided functions for storerooms, as the doors only really secured themselves from the drawbars on the outside only. The ground floor rooms at the front would have more than likely been porter and guard rooms, but up on this first floor and over the gate passage, inside these tower rooms there was a massive hall, still being on a grand scale despite having to accommodate the inner portcullis and murder hole for the entrance. It's also suggested that the other rooms here could have been the private apartments for the owner or for the constable of the castle, which would have been on the second floor, just right above the hall. The constable would have looked after the king's taxes and kept order in the castle. The stone castle was probably started in the early 1270s when Payne de Sherworth came of age. The inner ward was completed in the first phase of construction, along with the Great Hall and Solar. Payne died in 1277, and it's likely that he didn't see the inner ward completed. Payne's daughter Matilda married Henry, who was the third Earl of Lancaster, in 1298. Henry brought money and English influence to the continuing construction of Kidwelly. Henry constructed the outer curtain and the strong keep gatehouse. He also extended the castle walls around the town, and rebuilt the priory church across the river. The early castle changed hands a number of times, and after Roger's death in 1137, it came to the possession of Maurice de Londres, Lord of Kidwelly. In 1190, the Lord Rhys was a powerful Welsh prince, and he conquered the castle, but it was back in the Norman hands shortly after the 1200s. His son captured Kidwelly again and burned the castle. By the time of the Welsh uprising in 1257, it was in the hands of Patrick de Chaworth via marriage. The settlement at Kidwelly was partly destroyed, but the castle wasn't taken. In 1403, Owain Glyndor's forces besieged Kidwelly and burnt the town. He didn't get into the castle though, as it was relieved by English forces 3 weeks later. Kidwelly was passed down, but eventually it just belonged to the crown. The river estuaries of Wales were vulnerable to a French landing at the time, and they wanted to have strong defences in place. And by 1422 the gatehouse was finally complete. One of our favourite parts of the castle was the ability to see over the estuary and out over the town and the river. And on a day like today, it was really picture perfect, and you can put yourself in the position of the people that would have been protecting and patrolling the ruins. They would have been able to see for miles and had many different vantage points over unwanted enemies without putting themselves into too much danger. The views over the estuary are simply stunning. I really don't think there is a bad view in sight. The castle itself is an imposing monument of Norman power, and a beautiful example of the castle's development throughout the years. I love that you can look out onto the town of Kidwelly and see how it's been developed throughout time. Sadly, all newer buildings, as in the 15th century the old town was largely destroyed in a fierce rebellion, and the castle held out against the attack, but the town didn't. There is still some evidence around and information boards showing you. We get to then experience life inside the castle, the main beating heart of the fortress, and it was named the Inner Ward. This inner ward consisted of private apartments just for the lord, a grand great hall used for the all-important wine and dining, and kitchens to make sure that they really did eat and live like kings. The castle square inner ward was the first phase of building work carried out by the Chaworth family. It had a circular tower at each corner, and is thought to have been completed by 1283, when the king stayed for several days. The existing hall and chapel were built slightly later than the original internal buildings, but about which is not actually that well known. We make our way into the southeast tower, which is known as the Exchequer Tower, originally served as the seat of the lord of the castle up until the east wing was built, which would be why all of its floors except the lowest were heated with fireplaces. And in the 14th century, the lower floors of all 4 towers served as storage rooms and rooms for the servants. This tower was a place where all of the financial aid was put into order and collected, and it was a building that was served more like modern day human resources. Headed into the section off the hall and off into the room of the chapel, which is where I have to say this room is absolutely stunning when you look around, and you get to see all of the different architectural detailing in its windows and fonts. It's just incredible how much is still here for us to see, and I love the look of the weathered brick too. It really adds to the atmosphere here. Leading on, you can walk inside the sacristy, which is on the first floor. The chapel was added in the 14th century in the southern part of the eastern wall of the upper castle. It overlooked the riverside embankment, and it had spur buttresses to protect the building against landslides or collapsing. The tower had a basement of a defensive function, and the ground floor would have originally been used by the chaplain, and the top floor would have been where the chapel was actually located. And those windows and the stone bowl in the wall help us recognise this. There really is so much to see, explore and experience here, and climbing the towers is one of them. The crumbling staircases lead you up to the north-east tower, ready for the wall walk, overlooking the inner and outer ward from all angles. What I love about the wall walks is the ability to be able to see everything, all from a glimpse. Back in the day, I'm very much sure this came in handy if you wanted to know what was going on, or perhaps listen to the gossip of the castle. The northeast tower was known as the Lord's Tower, because of course that was where he and his family had their private apartments and latrines. It was closely accessible to the hall and the chapel as well. Following around, you can see inside of the northwest tower, and this was called the Meredith Tower, and it was connected by 2 staircases, except for the lowest floor, which historians have said could have served as a prison. Accessible only through the hatch in the ceiling, but the entrance to the tower is by a portal from the courtyard level. Whilst walking around, you can overlook the large building that we think was once the courthouse. Then making our way across to the final tower, which was the southwest tower and known as Julian's Tower, you're able to step up and inside all of the way to the top of the tower, showing you exactly what medieval apartments, rooms and vaulted upper rooms look like. I find it remarkable really how big these rooms are considering how they look from the outside. The views that they would have had throughout the many arrow slits leading up the tower would have been an advantage had you wanted to know who was around. The tower is still fully intact, and you can make your way right up to the battlements for the incredible, and I mean incredible, views of the valley and the town, not to mention a complete overview of the castle. We take a short stroll over to the castle's bakehouse. For many, it's the best place to be in the castle, for the many different pies, breads and treats that they would have been instructed to make for the lords. Inside this bakery you can still see the remains of 2 stoves and a pretty impressive oven, all attached on the north curtain of the wall. There are still so many rooms to visit and take in, and as we explore the later kitchen just before we leave, with its huge fireplaces at either end, this place sure was grand back in its heyday, and it has so much left to show off, including the town itself. When visiting here, it remains a mystery why this place isn't ransacked with tourists, queuing up to get in, but honestly, when you do visit, you can normally have the place to yourselves, and you can explore at your own pace. I would say that this has to be up there with becoming a favourite castle of mine. The more and more I explored, the more I was impressed, and the more I fell in love with it, and I really think you would too if you came here. So if you've enjoyed our visit to Kidwelly, please be sure to hit that like button, click the notification bell, and consider joining us on Patreon or subscribing to the channel. We would really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to our Patreons for their support. We'll see you in the next one. Till next time.